What am I doing? Okay, so we had a workshop here called ICTD 2.0. It was about collaboration, participation, and openness. We put together the workshop for a few reasons. Most importantly, there's the fact that almost a third of the world's population now use the internet. About 2/3 of the world's population now use mobile phones. Basically, lots of people are communicating using ICTs, obviously more than ever before. So what we're asking is, what does that all mean in the context of development? What does that change? How does it change things? So we put together this workshop. We had lots of spirited discussion, debate, and heated argument, perhaps. My own personal interest in this topic relates to, well, a few things, but I'd say at the moment a key issue is ethical consumption and ethical production. So I'm currently running a project called wikichains.com, and also some people at Royal Holloway and one of my colleagues at the Oxford Internet Institute run a similar project called Fair Tracing. And there's maybe 20 other projects that do very similar things. So the idea behind these projects is to kind of harness the information shadows of physical objects to allow tracing through a commodity chain, to allow or enable consumers at the site of consumption to learn more about the things that they're buying. I'd say it's quite interesting that there's been, everything we buy is quite globalized. The food you buy, the clothes you wear, they all come from all corners of the planet. So the stuff we buy is globalized, but information about that stuff, information about the sites of production isn't. It gets left behind at the sites of production. So what all these projects try and do is just enable that information to kind of re-globalize, if you will, to become reattached to the physical things that it represents. So to bring this all back to the workshop, what I think is now a possibility is to harness this fact that we have a third of the world online, or 2/3 of the world with mobile phones, to harness this in order to creating better information shadows to physical things. So you can imagine a system, just like the WikiChains project that I'm running with some colleagues, a system where you create this platform in which you allow people to generate content about things. And so, for example, let's say, I don't know, a can of Coke. You have a can of Coke, it's a physical object, it moves from site of production or sites of production to sites of consumption. What people can then do is add information about what the workers were paid, whether there were any harmful environmental impacts, animal welfare issues, any sort of information that you think might be relevant to people's own personal ethical choices when it comes to buying things. Now, this is important because, you might say, well, most people might not care about this sort of stuff. Your average consumer won't be bothered to look up this sort of stuff, and that's probably right. But just the fact that the system exists, that there can be this kind of radical transparency, I believe would scare enough companies to not doing whatever harmful, bad, unethical stuff in the first place. The fact that there is this potential for multiple spotlight effects on all the bad stuff that you might be doing. So I think that is a very real potential of peer production or crowdsourcing or user-generated content or whatever you want to call it within the context of ethical consumption and ultimately ethical production.
Maybe ask the question I did ask before. Why is it better than the fair trade seal then?
Why is it better? Well, I don't necessarily. I don't necessarily want to get into a discussion of whether it's better or worse, but I think it's necessary, or I think it's important, because the Fair Trade Seal, it does a useful job. It allows you to quickly make a choice about a product. This one's fair trade, this one isn't. So you can choose what you want to do there. But it's still a branding exercise, so you don't really know what's behind that label. You know the criteria. You can go to the Fair Trade website and see what it takes to become certified. But ultimately, each one of us have very different considerations when it comes to buying things. You may be more concerned with labor issues. I may be more concerned with environmental issues. Someone else may be more concerned with animal rights issues. And yes, there are multiple brands to give us insights into all of these things, but why not open it up further and build those brands on top of an open database, rather than this currently very closed system that we don't know what goes into. We don't know precisely what goes into the fair trade brands. We don't know precisely what goes into Rainforest Alliance, et cetera, et cetera. Those data sets aren't open, and for often quite good reasons. But I suppose that's another important point to consider, is that creating a platform that allows this kind of, if you will, radical transparency can have some quite harmful effects, as can all sorts of transparency. But I would argue that on the whole, the positive effects could far outweigh those harmful effects.
I guess these about 20 projects you were mentioning, they're like in emerging state, and the whole idea just makes sense if there are enough people joining, and if the net effects are big enough, so everyone is in. So are there efforts to fuse these platforms, or how?
Do you mean?
What do you think is going to happen in the next time? Because it doesn't make sense if everyone is
fragmented.
Yeah, right.
That's true. I mean, what we need is to congeal around 1, 2, maybe 3 platforms. Wikipedia works because it is Wikipedia. It wouldn't work if we were diluting our efforts into 20 different kinds of Wikipedia. So yes, I mean, there's no one of these projects has reached sufficient economy of scale yet to sort of make this be really useful and workable. But I think it's perhaps only a matter of time until we can agree on what just a good platform is to start throwing all this sorts of information onto.
You told me you're interested in general in something like the geography of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your observations on that, and how does this project you're doing tie in?
Well, that's a key potential problem here, because the internet has a very uneven geography, both in terms of what content is about and in terms of where contributors come from. So if you look at Wikipedia, for example, Wikipedia is incredibly geographically biased. There's lots and lots of articles about events, people, places in the global north. There's very little about the rest of the world. There's, just for example, there's more articles, more geotagged articles in Wikipedia about Antarctica than about all but one country in Africa. So that shouldn't be the case, because not many people live in Antarctica, irrespective of how interesting it is. Now this is a problem for a project like WikiChains, for example. It's a problem if you're trying to harness user-generated content for any purpose, because all that means is you'll be getting very uneven information. It will be only coming from certain sources and not others. So only certain voices will be heard, only certain types of representations will be created. But I mean, we can go back to what we started this discussion with. More and more people are coming online. More and more people are connected. Ideally, that will mean more and more voices are heard and more people participate. There's obviously still lots of other factors that encourage some people to participate and discourage others. Gender, class, whatnot. But hopefully we'll see a sort of blossoming of voices rather than this, what we're seeing at the moment, which isn't a representative sample of humanity in these sites of user-generated content.